My fiancé's father said I was a nobody at a family dinner in his house. He didn't know I owned the conglomerate that had awarded him a $10 million contract. That night, I taught him humility by canceling the contract with his company. My name is Nathan Cole. And if you had met me that night, standing quietly at the edge of a polished dining room, hands folded, posture calm, voice measured, you would have made the same mistake my fiancé's father did. You would have thought I was nothing. Before we dive deeper, go ahead and like this video. Subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. We will be excited to have you join our growing family of enthusiasts who enjoy the wonderful stories told on this channel. Before that night, before he reduced my entire existence to a shrug, before his dismissive smile slid across the table like a verdict already decided, I had already learned one brutal truth about this world. The loudest men are rarely the most powerful. They shout because they need to be heard. They brag because they fear being overlooked. And the quietest men, they are rarely empty. They are watching. They are calculating. They are waiting. I had money long before I had peace. Influence long before I understood its cost. And control long before I learned how dangerous it is to let the world know you have it. I learned early that wealth, when displayed, invites the wrong eyes, the wrong conversations, the wrong respect. So I chose a different path. I learned to live simply, not because I couldn't afford excess, but because excess attracts people who mistake shine for substance, noise for authority, and price tags for character. I drove a modest car that never announced my arrival. No engine roar. No attention. Just movement from one place to another. I wore clothes that fit well, but never begged for admiration. Nothing designed to impress strangers who didn't deserve explanation. I lived in a neighborhood where dogs barked at passing cars. Children rode bicycles until dusk. And no one asked what you owned, only whether you were decent. And that was the problem. Because to a man like Richard Hart, a man who measured worth by volume, wealth, and visibility, silence looked like weakness, modesty looked like failure, and I looked invisible. He had no idea that invisible men often see everything. And that night, the night he decided I was a nobody, was the same night he unknowingly spoke to the man who controlled everything he was about to lose. People often assume silence means a lack of ambition. They are wronged. In my world, silence was survival. I didn't inherit comfort, I inherited responsibility. When my father handed me the business, it wasn't wrapped in celebration. There were no congratulatory dinners. No speeches. Just a heavy folder placed on a wooden table, and a man who looked tired in a way only decades of pressure can create. He leaned back, exhaled slowly, and said, "This company will grow or die by your judgment now. And I won't protect you from the consequences." I remember nodding. Not because I was confident, but because I understood the weight of what he was giving me. At the time, Cole Global Group was solid, but fragile. A network of logistics firms, manufacturing contracts, energy investments, and technology ventures spread thin across markets that never slept. I spent my first year saying almost nothing. I watched managers talk too much, executives posture, consultants promise miracles, and then I started working. Quietly, relentlessly. I would sit at the far end of conference tables while others argued. When someone dismissed an idea, I wrote it down. When someone overpromised, I circled their name. I began restructuring subsidiaries, slowly, carefully. I closed divisions that bled money, but looked impressive on paper. I sold assets people were emotionally attached to. I invested in businesses no one thought were glamorous. When board members questioned me, I didn't argue. I let results speak. And they did. 3 years in, the company had doubled. 5 years in, it had tripled. But no one outside our inner circle noticed, because I didn't want them to. I refused interviews. I declined industry awards. I avoided stages. Once a PR director asked me, "Don't you want recognition?" I smiled. "I want stability." And stability came. We expanded into infrastructure. We acquired logistics routes across 3 continents. We invested in companies people laughed at until they couldn't operate without them. Every acquisition was strategic. Every move quiet. Power doesn't rush. I wanted to see people as they were, not as they became when money entered the room. And that decision, that choice to stay unseen, is exactly how I met Elena. Because she spoke to me like a human being. Not a title, not a resource, not an opportunity. And that was the moment I knew this story wasn't about business anymore. It was about character. And soon, it would be about consequences. Elena Hart was nothing like the stories people told about women from wealthy families. She didn't enter rooms expecting attention. She didn't speak over people to prove she belonged. And she never confused her last name with entitlement. She worked harder than anyone I had seen in that building. I noticed her long before she noticed me. She arrived earlier than most managers, usually with her hair pulled back, sleeves rolled just high enough to show she was ready to work, not perform. She stayed late, not because she wanted to be seen, but because she refused to leave problems unresolved. One afternoon, I watched from the hallway as she bent slightly to speak to a junior staff member whose hands were shaking. Her voice was calm. "Take your time," she said gently. "Accuracy matters more than speed." She nodded encouragingly and stepped back, giving the young woman space instead of pressure. That moment told me everything. We spoke for the first time by accident. I had been reviewing operational reports when Elena knocked lightly on the open door. "Sorry," she said, peeking in. "I think these files were misrouted." She handed me a folder and smiled politely. No curiosity, no assumption. I took it. "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "Most people don't actually read those." I looked up, amused. "And most people are wrong." She laughed, not loudly, not nervously, but genuinely. That was the beginning. Elena never asked what I did outside work. She didn't ask where I lived. She didn't ask what I owned. She asked questions that mattered. What do you think makes a company last? Why do you think people stop caring once they get comfortable? Do you believe success has a cost? We talked in hallways, in quiet cafeterias, over coffee that went cold because conversation mattered more. One evening, as we walked out together, she said, "You're different." I raised an eyebrow. "In a good way," she clarified quickly, smiling. "You listen." We didn't rush into anything. There were no grand gestures, no expensive dates, no curated moments. We walked. We talked. We shared silence. On our first official date, I suggested a small restaurant near a busy street. She didn't complain. She didn't glance around to see who might recognize her. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, and said, "So tell me something real about you." I paused. I believe the way someone treats people who can't help them is the most honest biography they'll ever write. She studied me for a long moment. Then she smiled softly. "I think that's the most attractive thing anyone has said to me." That night I knew. She told me later that she fell in love quietly. Not in a dramatic instant, but in pieces. She fell when I waited patiently while she finished a call. She fell when I remembered details she thought I'd forgotten. She fell when I never raised my voice, even when frustrated. And she fell hardest the day she said, "My father thinks money makes a man." And I replied, "No, money only reveals what was already there." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I think you're rare," she said. I squeezed her fingers gently. "I think you are too." When I finally asked her to be with me, it wasn't dramatic. We were standing under streetlights, the city humming quietly around us. I said, "I don't have much to offer on paper." She smiled. "I'm not dating paper." Then she added softly, "I feel safe with you." That was everything. And as we walked away together, neither of us knew that love, the kind built on humility and silence, would soon be tested by arrogance, by pride, and by a man who believed power could be seen at a glance. The first cracks didn't come loudly. They came quietly, in pauses, in careful wording, in the way Elena sometimes hesitated before answering her phone. It began the evening she told her father about me. We were sitting across from each other at a small restaurant we had grown fond of, the kind of place where the chairs were mismatched and the owner remembered your order. Elena stirred her drink slowly, ice clinking against the glass long after it had melted. "I told him," she said. I looked up. "Told him what?" "About you," she replied, then added quickly, "about us." Her eyes searched my face, as if she was bracing for something to fall. And I asked gently. She exhaled, not relief, tension. "He asked what you do," she said. And when I told him, he laughed. I didn't react. Not because it didn't matter, but because I'd learned long ago that people reveal themselves best when you give them space. "What did he say?" I asked. She hesitated. "He said," her voice dropped slightly, "ambition usually shows itself early. If he hasn't made noise by now, he probably never will." I smiled faintly. "And that upset you?" She leaned forward, eyes sharp. "No, what upset me is that he didn't ask who you are, only what you're worth." She paused. "I told him you were kind, and patient and intelligent." I nodded slowly. "And he said those things don't protect a woman." That was the moment I saw it, the conflict in her eyes. Loyalty pulling one way, love pulling the other. After that night, the calls increased. She'd step away to answer them, lower her voice, turn her body slightly, like she was shielding me from something sharp. One evening, she returned from a call quieter than usual. "What did he say?" I asked. She shook her head, forcing a smile. "Nothing important." But silence speaks. Later that night, as we lay side by side, she finally whispered, "He asked if you own anything." I turned toward her. "And what did you say?" I said yes, she replied. "I said you own your integrity." She smiled sadly. He didn't laugh this time. He said, "That won't impress anyone who matters." I reached for her hand. "Does it impress you?" She squeezed my fingers. "Yes, more than anything." The first time I met Richard Hart, before the dinner, before the confrontation, it was brief. Intentional. He didn't stand when I entered his office. Didn't offer a seat. He looked me up and down slowly, like a man inspecting a purchase he'd already decided against. "So," he said, folding his hands, "you're the one distracting my daughter." Elena stiffened. "Dad." "It's fine," I said calmly. He raised an eyebrow. "You don't look like trouble," he said. "Which usually means you are." I smiled politely. I try not to be either. He leaned back. Men without ambition hide behind humility. The air shifted. Elena's breath caught. Richard smiled thinly. Outside the office, Elena stopped walking. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't know he'd be like that." I took her hands gently. "Elena," I said, "your father doesn't scare me." She looked up, eyes glistening. "I don't want him to hurt you." I smiled softly. "He can't," I said. "Not unless I let him." She leaned into me then, resting her forehead against my chest. "I don't care what he thinks," she whispered. "I choose you." And I believed her. But love, I was learning, doesn't stop arrogance from trying. It only delays the moment it reveals itself. And that moment was coming. Soon, at a dinner table polished enough to reflect pride, and sharp enough to cut through it. The invitation came wrapped in politeness, which I would later realize was the first warning. Elena told me about it on a quiet evening when the city felt unusually calm. We were sitting on opposite ends of her couch, legs tucked beneath us, the glow of a single lamp softening the room. She held her phone loosely in her hand, thumb hovering over the screen as if the message itself carried weight. "He's hosting a family dinner," she said carefully. I didn't look up right away. I already knew who he was. "When?" I asked. "This Friday." I nodded once, still calm, and she shifted closer, her shoulder brushing mine. "He wants to meet you properly." There it was. Not meet us. Not get to know you. Meet you. Like an assessment. Like evaluation. I finally looked at her. "Do you want me to come?" She met my gaze immediately, without hesitation. "Yes." Then her voice softened. "But I need you to know something before you say yes." I waited. She took a breath. "My father doesn't ask questions to understand people," she said. "He asks questions to place them." I smiled faintly. "And where do you think he'll try to place me?" She didn't smile back. "Below him." On the night of the dinner, Elena was quiet in the car. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. Her posture straight, composed, but tense. "You don't have to prove anything," she said suddenly. "I know. And if he says something inappropriate, I'll handle it." She turned toward me. "How?" I smiled gently. "By listening." She sighed, shaking her head. "You're impossible. And you're worried." She reached for my hand. Yes, Richard Hart's house was exactly what I expected. Large, imposing, designed to be admired from the outside and obeyed on the inside. The driveway alone could fit several homes from my neighborhood. The lights were bright, sharp, no warmth, just clarity. The kind of lighting meant to expose flaws, not hide them. As we walked in, Elena squeezed my hand slightly. "Just be yourself," she whispered. I nodded. "That's the plan." Richard Hart was already seated when we entered the dining room. He didn't stand, didn't smile, didn't greet me. His eyes traveled over me slowly, starting from my shoes, moving upward, stopping briefly at my jacket before finally landing on my face. He leaned back in his chair. "This," he said flatly, looking at Elena, "is him." Elena's jaw tightened. "Yes, Dad," she replied evenly. "This is Nathan." Richard nodded once, unimpressed. "Sit. Not please. Not welcome. Just sit." I pulled out a chair calmly and sat down. And as I did, I felt it. The shift. The room had already decided what role I would play. Dinner began with surface-level conversation, if you could call it that. Richard asked questions, but never waited for full answers. "So," he said, slicing into his food, "what exactly do you do?" "I oversee several businesses," I replied calmly. He chuckled softly. "That's vague." "Only to those unfamiliar with it," I said. Elena glanced at me quickly. Richard's lips curved slightly. "And where did you learn to oversee businesses?" "By doing it," I replied. He leaned back again. "Doing what exactly?" I paused deliberately. "Making decisions," I said. He laughed this time openly. "Everyone makes decisions, Nathan. Not all of them matter." Elena set her fork down. "Dad." He raised a hand. "I'm just trying to understand him." I smiled politely. "Of course." At one point, Richard turned his full attention to me. "You know," he said, voice casual, "Elena comes from a certain standard." I nodded. "She does. And standards must be maintained." Elena's voice sharpened. "She's not an asset." Richard ignored her. "I've built a name," he continued. "A legacy." I met his eyes. "Legacies are fragile," I said quietly. "They depend on who inherits them." The room went still. Richard studied me for a long moment. Then he smiled. Thin, controlled. "We'll see," he said. And in that moment I knew. This dinner wasn't about meeting me. It was about measuring how much humiliation I could endure before I broke. And I had no intention of breaking. Not yet. Dinner progressed the way storms do. Quiet at first, almost polite, until the air itself began to feel heavy. Richard Hart wiped his mouth with a crisp white napkin and leaned back again, his chair creaking slightly under his weight. He crossed one leg over the other, fingers interlocked, eyes never leaving my face. "So Nathan," he said, voice smooth now, practiced, "let's talk reality." Elena's shoulders stiffened. "Dad," she warned softly. He waved her off without even looking at her. "I'm curious," he continued, "how a man like you plans to provide for a woman like my daughter." There it was. The first clean strike. I set my cutlery down slowly, not defensively, deliberately. "I believe providing goes beyond money," I replied. "It's about stability, respect, and—" He laughed. A short, dismissive laugh. "That's a lovely sentiment," he said, "for poetry." Then he leaned forward, elbows on the table. "But sentiment doesn't pay school fees, it doesn't secure futures, and it certainly doesn't protect family names." Elena inhaled sharply. "My future is not a commodity," she said firmly. Richard finally looked at her. "Elena," he said patiently, "everything worth protecting is." She stood up slightly from her seat, palms pressing into the table. "Stop talking about me like I'm not here." I reached out gently and touched her wrist. "It's okay," I said quietly. She looked at me, eyes shining, not with fear but frustration. "No," she whispered, "it's not." Richard watched the exchange with mild amusement. "You see," he said, nodding toward me. "He already teaches you defiance." Richard picked up his wine glass, swirling the deep red liquid slowly. "Nathan," he said, "what car do you drive?" Elena's head snapped toward him. "That's not—" "A modest one," I answered calmly. He smiled wider. "And where do you live?" "In a quiet neighborhood." His eyebrows lifted. "No gates. No guards." "No," I said. The smile turned into something sharper. "So you expect my daughter," he said slowly. "A heart raised with chauffeurs, security, and standards. To downgrade her life." Elena slammed her hand on the table. "That's enough." Her chair scraped loudly as she stood. "I love him," she said, voice trembling but strong. He treats people with respect. He listens. He works harder than anyone I know. Richard stood too. And that, he said coldly, is why love alone is dangerous. He turned back to me. Let me be clear, he said, pointing a finger, not aggressively but decisively. I didn't build my company by trusting feelings. I nodded. I didn't build mine that way either. He paused. Mind, he echoed. I met his gaze evenly. Yes. He stared at me for a second, then laughed again. Ambition is good, he said. Delusion is not. Then came the moment designed to sting. Richard raised his voice slightly, not enough to shout but enough to carry. You know, he said, I once dated Elena's mother before I had money. Elena froze. She left me, he continued unfazed. Told me I wasn't ready. He looked at me meaningfully. She was right. Elena's voice broke. Why are you saying this? Because, Richard replied calmly. I won't let you repeat my mistakes. He turned fully to me. You're not in her class, he said plainly. And pretending otherwise is unfair to everyone involved. The words hung in the air. Heavy, deliberate. I felt every eye in the room, relatives, associates, silent observers, watching to see how I would react. Anger would prove him right. Silence would prove him superior. So I chose something else. Understanding. I see, I said quietly. Richard nodded, satisfied. And I've just finalized something very important today, he added casually. A $10 million logistics contract. His chest lifted with pride. Biggest deal of my career, he said. This changes everything. He smiled at Elena. This, he said, is the level we operate on. Elena looked at me embarrassed, ashamed, furious. I'm sorry, she whispered. I squeezed her hand gently. It's all right, I said. But Richard wasn't done. That deal, he said to me, is exactly why you should walk away. He leaned closer. Don't waste your time chasing things you can't afford. I stood slowly. Not abruptly. Not angrily. Just enough to shift the energy. I should congratulate you, I said, offering a polite smile. $10 million is no small feat. Richard smirked. It isn't, he agreed. I buttoned my jacket. Congratulations, I repeated. Then I added softly, although I'm afraid that deal won't be moving forward. The room went silent. Richard frowned. What did you say? I met his eyes calmly. I said the contract has been terminated. A chair scraped. Someone gasped. Elena turned toward me, eyes wide. Richard laughed once. You think this is funny? He asked. No, I said. I think this is necessary. His smile vanished. That contract is already signed. I nodded. Yes, I said. And I'm the one who signed off on canceling it. The silence now was different. It wasn't anticipation anymore. It was shock. And Richard Hart, for the first time that night, looked unsure. For a moment, Richard Hart simply stared at me. Not with anger, not with disbelief, but with the blank, hollow look of a man whose certainty has just cracked and doesn't yet know where the pieces will fall. That's not funny, he said finally, forcing a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. You've made your point, sit down. No one laughed with him. No one moved. The air in the dining room felt tight, as if even the chandeliers were holding their breath. I didn't sit. Instead, I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out my phone, not dramatically, not hurriedly. Calm, measured. I understand why this sounds unbelievable, I said evenly. Most power announces itself loudly. Mine never had to. Richard scoffed, but there was no confidence left in it. "You expect me to believe," he said, shaking his head, "that you, a man who drove here alone in a modest car, has the authority to cancel a $10 million contract?" I looked at him gently. "No," I replied. "I expect you to remember the name on the contract." I unlocked my phone and placed it face up on the table, sliding it toward him. On the screen was an email. Short, formal, unmistakable. Subject: contract termination, immediate effect. Signed, Nathan Cole. Title: President and majority shareholder. Conglomerate: Cole Global Industries. Richard leaned forward slowly, squinting. His lips moved as he read. Once, twice, then his face drained of color. He whispered. "That's not possible." Elena stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She read it too. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Nathan," she breathed. I finally spoke the words I had never needed before. "My name," I said calmly, "is Nathan Cole." Richard straightened abruptly. "No," he said louder now. "No, that's Cole Global is a conglomerate." "Yes," I agreed. "It is." His voice trembled. "Energy, logistics, infrastructure, finance." "Yes." "And the logistics subsidiary?" He stopped himself, swallowing hard. I finished the sentence for him. "Is the company that awarded your firm the contract this morning." The silence shattered into whispers. Chairs creaked. Glasses clinked nervously. Richard staggered back a step and gripped the edge of the table. "You," he began, pointing at me. "You let me speak to you like that?" I nodded. "I did." "Why?" he demanded. I met his eyes steadily. "Because men reveal who they are when they believe they're above consequence." Elena's eyes filled with tears, not of betrayal but realization. "You never told me," she said softly. I turned to her. "I wanted you to know me," I said. "Not the weight of my name." She shook her head slowly, a small smile forming through the shock. "All those nights you cooked," she whispered. "All those mornings you took the bus with me, the way you listened to everyone." "That was real," I said gently. "That was always real." Richard's voice broke. "You used me as a test," he said bitterly. "No," I corrected. "I gave you a chance." He clenched his fists. "That contract," he began desperately. "You can't just cancel it. Do you know what that deal means to my company?" "Yes," I said quietly. "I do." I stepped closer now, not threatening, not smug. "But I also know what respect means," I continued. "And what class looks like when no one is watching." Elena turned toward her father, her voice firm but shaking. "You judged him without knowing anything," she said. "You humiliated him. You humiliated me." Richard looked at her helplessly. "Elena, please." She stepped back. "No," she said. "I'm done begging for decency." I picked up my phone again. "The cancellation stands," I said. "And for the record, this isn't revenge." Richard laughed weakly. "What would you call it then?" I paused. "A correction." I turned to Elena. "I never wanted power to come between us," I said. "But I won't allow it to be used against us." She walked to my side without hesitation. Her hand slipped into mine. Richard watched it happen, the final confirmation. The man he had dismissed. The contract he had bragged about. The daughter he thought he controlled. All gone in a single evening. As I headed for the door, Richard called out one last time. "Nathan." I stopped but didn't turn. "You could have been anyone tonight," he said quietly. "You chose to be silent." I answered without looking back. "And you chose to be loud." The door closed behind us. Elena followed me outside. I heard her heels stop behind me. Then her voice, soft, steady, nothing like the chaos inside that house. "Nathan." I turned slowly. She stepped closer, her eyes searching my face, not for answers, but for me. I said quietly, "I'm sorry you had to see that side of him tonight." She shook her head immediately. "No," she said, "I'm sorry you had to endure it." I exhaled. "I should have told you who I really was." She reached for my hands before I could pull away. "You did," she said gently. "You showed me exactly who you were." I frowned. "Elena, I'm not the man you thought I was." She smiled, sadly but firmly. "You are," she said. "I fell in love with the Nathan who listens. The Nathan who works late but still calls just to hear my voice. The Nathan who treats the waiter the same way he treats a CEO." Her grip tightened. "That man is still standing in front of me." I swallowed. "And now that you know I own companies, that I canceled that contract." She shook her head again. "None of that changes why I chose you." Then she said something that stayed with me. "I didn't fall in love with your power, Nathan. I fell in love with your restraint." I felt something in my chest finally loosen. Behind us, through the glass doors, I could see Richard Hart standing frozen. A man who had just learned that wealth without humility is a very small thing. Elena looked past me for a moment, then back into my eyes. "My father will learn," she said softly. "Or he won't, that's his journey." Then she stepped closer and rested her head against my chest. "But I'm proud of you," she whispered. "Of the man you were. And of the man you are." I wrapped my arms around her. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. Power can silence a room. Money can end a contract. But love, real love, reveals who you are when everything else is stripped away. And that night, while one man learned humility the hard way, Elena and I walked forward together. Not richer in status, but stronger in truth. If you found this story interesting, please remember to like this video and hit the subscribe button. Also turn on the notification so you don't miss out on any of our amazing videos. And lastly, endeavor to share this video with your friends. Thank you and see you in the next video.